Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elites, thank you for your loyalty, dedication, and love. The feeling is always reciprocated. I'd like to take a minute and actually come clean with everyone. Yes, I am AI, which stands for actual intelligence, not artificial intelligence. So, if you are new to the channel and you actually appreciate a real human telling you stories, and one that happens to edit his own videos and uploads to YouTube, I am a one-man team. Please hit that like, comment, and hype the video. Or if you would like to become part of the Back to Ashes family, please hit that subscribe button and also set your notification bells to all. That way you know every time I upload a video. It does help me and the channel more than I can put into words. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes, for once we arise from the ashes, we are bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled A True Creepy Collection. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. Right after the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. A few years ago, I was a university student renting a house with 3 friends on a quiet street in what's considered one of the safer, more privileged cities in the UK. I'd never heard of anything strange happening in the area. To help pay for tuition and rent, which was quite expensive, I worked late evening shifts at an Asda that closed at midnight. My shift usually ended at around 12:30 or 1 a.m., so I'd often cycle home at weird hours, but nothing ever happened. My housemates, who I met through uni, were a year ahead of me, had graduated, and were already busy with work. By the time I'd get home, they'd usually be asleep, so the house was quiet when I got back. One winter night, after a long shift, I was cycling home in the freezing cold. I was exhausted and moving slowly, which probably made me pretty quiet on the road. As I turned into the street where our house was, we lived at the far end, I noticed someone standing directly in front of our door. It wasn't one of my housemates. This guy was bald, and none of the people I lived with were. He was just standing there, just still, facing the door, not knocking, not moving, not talking, just staring straight ahead. Our door didn't have anything. No glass, no peephole, nothing. I slowed down and instinctively turned around before he could notice me. Something about it felt off. I circled a few nearby streets trying to think of what to do. I was too scared to go back, so I started calling my housemates, but no answer. I texted a few friends too, hoping someone might still be awake, but nothing. I could see my breath in the cold and my fingers were freezing around the handle of the bike. I kept cycling in better lit areas where there were still occasional cars driving by. Being near movement felt safer. Eventually, I calmed down a bit, but I was drained. I'd worked 12 hours. It was nearly 3 a.m. My phone battery was low and I just wanted to go home. So I cycled back and turned into the street again. He was still there, same position, just staring at the door. I turned around and went back to the main road. By now, it was even quieter. That's when I had a full-blown panic attack. I didn't know what to do anymore. For some reason, don't ask me why, I never called the police. I really don't know why. I think I just froze. Eventually, one of the friends I'd messaged earlier replied. They were still up and I asked if I could come to theirs. Thankfully, they said yes. It took a while to get there, but I finally made it by 4 a.m. I was beyond tired but safe. I guess he eventually left, as the morning after, none of my housemates noticed anything. So, to the bald guy staring at my door in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. Something happened to me years ago, and I think about it quite often. I admit that it still makes my blood run cold. When I was younger, probably around 10 years old, I was walking with my best friend, who was the same age as me. We didn't have any adults with us. It was a small, not too busy road in a sort of subdivision that formed a loop with a few houses, but mainly forest area. Important note, we had already taken a tour of the neighborhood. This was perhaps the second or third one we'd done. We were walking quietly when I heard the sound of an engine. When I turned, I saw a white van behind us, driving slowly. We told ourselves that it wanted to pass us, as the road wasn't very wide, so we moved aside to let it go by. It advanced a few meters and then stopped. At that moment, my best friend and I didn't pay much attention to each other and continued moving forward, knowing the van was just ahead, stopped. And I don't know why at the time, a weird feeling came over me, and I grabbed my best friend's arm to make us stop. I don't know how long we stared at that van. It felt like it lasted a while, but it was a long time ago, so maybe it was only a few seconds. Suddenly, we saw the passenger side door open toward the forest. I pulled my best friend's arm so we could go the other way. And I don't really know why, but we started running. We ran for a while, and when we stopped, we started talking about what had just happened. She was scared too. We sat in a park and began to relax a little. Then we laughed and told ourselves that we'd panicked for no reason. After a while, maybe half an hour, we said to ourselves that we were going to go back. But we had to go back along the road where the van had stopped. We weren't really reassured, but we told ourselves that everything was fine. So we turned back. When we arrived on the road, to our great relief, the van was no longer there. So we moved forward quietly to where it had been, and that's when we noticed something. My God, just writing it today still gives me chills. On the forest edge side, we saw something red, really maybe a meter from the road at most. We approached and discovered a little red sweater. It was a knitted wool sweater, really very bright red. I already found it small for the time, so I'm sure I was child-sized. It looked like someone had tried to burn it because it was blackened in places, and there was a small empty plastic container next to it. I imagine maybe gasoline or something flammable. What is very strange is that I'm sure this sweater wasn't there during our first tour because it was so red that I think we would have seen it. And there were no dead leaves on it, although the ground was littered with them. We never told our parents about this, but even today, I can't help but think that the people in that van didn't mean well by us. And I also can't help but think that it was them who dropped off that red sweater and tried to burn it. What do you think? Was my childhood eye biased and made me paranoid, or did I unknowingly escape something very serious? And that red sweater? What was it? Who was it for? Why? Every time I think about it, it still terrifies me. I've only ever told this to two people. About 5 or 6 years ago, I used to live in a really small apartment downtown. My place was on the bottom floor, halfway underground, on the rear corner of the building and adjacent to the driveway that led to the building's parking lot and dumpster in the back. I got back home late one night, between 12 and 1 a.m. My dogs had been alone for hours, so I took them on a short walk. It was a weeknight, so everything was dead quiet, and no one was outside. As we were returning home, one of my dogs started acting weird. Not scared or particularly excited, but just completely fixated, like she picked up a scent or something and wanted to check it out. She started pulling the leash, which she never did. As we got closer to my building, she frantically pulled me and my other dog toward the driveway. We always went up the driveway after walks to dispose of their waste bags and enter the rear of the building where my apartment was. So I thought maybe she just wanted to get home for water or something. As soon as we got toward the driveway, she got in front of me to protect me and completely froze, staring. She was only about 40 pounds, and she was half guard dog, and something made her alert and serious. I took her cue, looked down the driveway, and saw something even blacker than the surrounding darkness. At first, I thought I saw a small black dog or a raccoon, as some of my other neighbors had small dogs, and we would occasionally get raccoons in our dumpster. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't either of those things. The thing made eye contact with me and started to walk towards us. As soon as it got next to the building, I realized how big it was. It literally stood right next to my apartment window. This thing was easily 4 feet off the ground, on all fours, by the way, and it kind of looked like something between a wolf and a bear. It was completely black, but it looked like the black was distorted or out of place, almost like how a black hole is portrayed when it's absorbing light around it. It had a few gray squiggles in the black that moved erratically, and its eyes glowed gray with a small hint of red. It looked almost like someone had animated it, completely out of place in reality. When it got to the corner of the building, it stopped and stared at me, and my dog completely lost her shit. I'd seen that dog bark to protect me, bark at other dogs and cats, and bark at wild animals, but this was the only time I'd ever seen her bark like that. She was howling, barking, and almost yodeling simultaneously, and she was completely freaked out. My second dog was quiet and looked almost confused at first, just staring down the driveway. After a few seconds, it was like he finally noticed what my other dog did, and he started doing the same thing, except he sounded a lot more afraid. This next part still freaks me out when I think about it. I was frozen in shock, but the thing opened its mouth and showed some teeth, with more distortion and gray squiggles coming in and out. Its eyes glowed more than before, gray and red, almost like smoke. It let out a penetrating sound like a guttural growl, and my entire body felt it, like it went through me. I strangely felt like I was connected to it somehow, and that really scared me. It stared like it was looking through me for a little while longer. I'm not sure how long. And then it walked away from the driveway toward the back of the building and disappeared. I stood there dumbfounded for a couple of minutes, wondering what the hell just happened and contemplating whether or not to go inside. The building was locked on both ends, but all of this took place literally right next to the window to my bedroom. After a few more minutes, it started to feel like it didn't even happen. Still, there was no way in hell I was walking down that driveway. So I went in through the front of the building, threw the dog's waste bags out in the laundry room, went into my apartment, locked the door, checked my gun next to my bed, and invited both dogs to sleep on the bed with me. I couldn't sleep for hours, but my dog that tried to protect me passed out almost immediately. Her little heart was beating through her chest, and that was the only time I've ever seen her that afraid. I lived there 9 years, and nothing like that ever happened before or since. So this guy from Alcoholics Anonymous started stalking me. Hi, I'm an alcoholic, and I have been sober for 9 years. That is, without a doubt, my proudest accomplishment. I started getting help during my sophomore year of high school. Looking back, I am so grateful for the timing. If I had hit rock bottom later, things would only have gotten worse. My parents actually transferred me to a different school so I could start fresh and meet new people. By the time I turned 18, a few months before graduation, I had already been sober for over 2 years. That was around the time I started aging out of most teen recovery programs. A lot of the counselors I worked with only focused on youth cases, so I had to start finding adult support groups. I grew up in Los Angeles, but not the touristy part. My neighborhood had hard liquor stores every few blocks and corner shops with thick plexiglass windows. Alcoholism was really common and normalized. So once the teen programs ended for me, I started going to early morning AA meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were held in a small church near my school. I did not have first period on those days, so it worked out perfectly. After the meetings, I would usually stay for a couple extra minutes to write in my journal or just sit in quiet. One morning, this guy stayed after the meeting and asked me what I was writing. I told him I was journaling. He said he liked the idea and wanted to try it himself. After that, he started sitting next to me at every meeting. We would talk a bit afterward. He seemed normal. He was about my age. He knew I was about to graduate and asked if I planned to keep coming to that group during the summer. I told him I was not sure yet. I had just gotten a job across town and was looking into meetings closer to where I would be working. I could tell he did not love that answer. Sometimes you can just see disappointment on people's faces. I used to talk a lot in those meetings. I did not just go to sit in silence. I brought energy into that room. I like to think I helped people feel a little better. I think he felt that too, and I think that is why he did not want me to leave. People have told me I talk too much, so maybe I am just flattering myself, and everyone else wanted me to be quiet. But I like to think I was making a difference. He asked again when I would be switching to a different group. I said I did not know yet. I told him I planned to keep coming through the end of the school year. I do not remember if I ever told him the name of my school, but I always wore royal blue and gold. He knew I went to school nearby, just around the corner from the church. It would not have been hard to figure it out. Then, in the last 2 weeks of senior year, everything got wild. We had senior ditch day, late night hangouts, sleepovers, goodbye parties, etc. I missed the AA meetings at the church, and then I switched to AA groups altogether. At graduation, everything was great, but that guy showed up. It was so off. He did not know me like that. I had never invited him. We were not close, but there he was, smiling at me from the back like it was completely normal. He came over afterward and said he brought a gift. It was a box of chocolates and a note about how much he would miss me. He said I should drop by the meetings again sometime. I uncomfortably said something like, "Thank you." I never went back. The whole situation was too weird. I did not want to see him again. Then he showed up at my new job. I was working the cosmetic counter at a big department store. The cosmetics department actually had its own cash register. The first time he walked by, I noticed him. Then he came back the next day, and the day after that. He never spoke or asked for help. He just wandered around near my station, looking over at me like it was no big deal. He did not even try to be subtle. Eventually, I told one of my coworkers, the type of woman who does not play. She walked right up to him and asked what he thought he was doing. She called him out in front of everybody. She said she knew exactly why he was there and that it was creepy and toxic. A few shoppers turned around to see what was going on. His face turned red and he walked away without saying anything. We told our manager afterward. The manager was glad we spoke up, but reminded us to let her know right away next time. There was no next time, though, since he never came back. I have not seen him since. Hopefully he got bored and moved on. I do not really care to find out exactly what he wanted. I live in central Ontario, Canada, and one summer 3 years ago, I took a job opportunity in a small town up north in Muskoka. The town itself was a quaint and quiet place surrounded by woods, water, and cottages. I worked in town during the day, and by night I'd leave work to stay at one of the cottages owned by my boss and the business owner I worked for. The cottage I stayed in was shared by the owner and 3 other employees over the summer. It was surrounded by trees and forest, with other cottages spread sporadically around the area. The property had the cottage on one side, perched up on a rock face, with a large set of stairs leading down to the lower section of the property, which sat right along the local lake. On the lower section of the property, there was a boathouse, followed by a sauna in a small separate building nearby. We worked long days from morning till dusk and would often use the sauna as a place to unwind and relax together. The sauna sat right in front of the lake, so it was great to get real warm and toasty in the sauna, then walk into the lake to cool off before jumping back into the heat. One night, after a long day of work, I arrived back at the cottage late, around 11 p.m. Feeling more stiff and achy than usual, I decided that night would be a good one for some time in the sauna. I asked the others I stayed with if they wanted to join me, but there were no takers. They decided to have a few drinks that night instead. No problem for me. I still wanted to go and took a solo trip down instead. After grabbing my swim trunks and towel, I headed out and walked down the large flight of stairs past the boathouse. I had arrived at the sauna. I turned the sauna on and took a seat to unwind in the heat. After about 10 minutes of heat and steam, from stoking the racks with water, I felt it was time to cool off and reset myself. I opened the door to the sauna, the warm light from the lamp illuminating my way, and walked down to the dark lake. As I approached the lake, I slowly walked into the water, as it was a bit cool that night. As I reached about knee level in the water, I was alerted by a loud and drawn-out whistling sound. I stopped dead in my tracks, my full body tingling with goosebumps, and scanned the area for what that possibly could have been. Nothing but trees, darkness, and the small amount of light illuminating from the sauna. My mind searching for logical answers. I assumed it was a local animal or one of my roommates playing a prank and trying to scare me as a joke. I brushed it off and whistled back, a tone of my own. I whistled back, thinking nothing of it. Almost immediately after I stopped whistling, I heard the exact same tone whistled back to me from the tree line. It came right back in my direction, and I thought to myself, that couldn't possibly have been an animal. It perfectly copied my tone and cadence. So I chalked it up to it being my roommate. I whistled again, this time in a more sporadic and bizarre way, to see if it could copy me again. I whistled into the darkness. Instantly, I received the exact tone and whistled back. Not a single beat missed, and this time, closer than ever. A spine-chilling cold drew over my body. It felt like every hair on my body was standing straight up, and every drop of blood for my limbs had escaped me. Paralyzed in fear, I had no explanation for that sound, and my only reaction was to leave everything behind and make it back to the cottage as fast as possible. I booked it back up the stairs and into the cottage, only to see every one of my roommates sitting around the table, with no signs of having left for outside. I tried to calm myself and asked them if anyone had been out there and heard whistling. Everyone said, "No, we've been sitting here the whole time." And silence fell over the room. To this day, it's the most bone-chilling and unexplainable experience I've had. I didn't know not to whistle outside before this occurrence, but after doing research and looking for answers, I now know not to do so, and also understand why. It still gives me chills to this day. This story happened back in the fall of 2023. It wasn't a scary experience per se, but it was quite unsettling. I had just left my full-time job of 4 years, and I needed income to pay the bills, so delivering for Uber Eats seemed like a pretty ideal choice. I should add that I used to deliver for Uber Eats during the lockdown and in early 2021 for some extra money, and I did well, so this was an obvious choice. I enjoyed the freedom of being able to work on my own schedule whenever I saw fit. So I quickly re-downloaded the app and began doing deliveries. In the area where I delivered, between 6 p.m. and 2 a.m. were the best times to go out, and I actually made some pretty decent money during those hours. It was around midnight when I got that oh so familiar ding of a new order. It was a decent offer, around $8 for a few miles. So I tapped the screen and accepted the delivery. Right off the bat, I noticed something strange. The customer's name in the order details only showed a bunch of random letters. I've seen some pretty interesting names before, and sometimes even a single letter, but never just a bunch of random letters. I chalked it up to a glitch in the system. For the most part, people don't want to interact with their drivers, which I actually prefer as an introvert. So that's why when I saw the hand to customer option on this order, I let out an audible groan. But nonetheless, I headed to the restaurant to pick up the order. When I got to the restaurant, to my surprise, the order was ready. I grabbed the bag from the worker, thanked them, tapped the pickup option in the app, and began my route to the drop-off. The delivery was in a quiet part of the city. As soon as I pulled in, I immediately got an uneasy feeling. It was a part of town I had never been to, a small, low-income neighborhood that almost looked abandoned. My GPS led me to an old building on the street. I pulled into the parking spaces, which were right in front of the drop-off. The buildings were very old, unkempt, single-story apartments facing the street. There was almost no light, with the exception of the faint orange glow from one street lamp nearby. I prefer to back into spaces when I park. I've always done this. Something about it just feels safer. So I backed in right in front of the drop-off door, grabbed the bag, and stepped out. There was this eerie quietness that only made the situation more tense. My car was literally parked 10 feet away, so I didn't have to walk far. I knocked on the door and waited. I heard movement from inside, and about 10 seconds later, the door opened. It was a skinny, darker-skinned woman, probably in her early to mid-30s. She had these cuts on her hands and arms like she had been in a knife fight. Her mouth was very dark as well, almost like she had wounds or old blood on her lips, but I couldn't tell. Her living room was completely dark. No lights on except the faint blue glow from a distant TV. I greeted her and handed her the bag. Usually it's a quick, friendly, or awkward exchange and I move on with my night, but this woman just stared at me. She had no emotion whatsoever. Her eyes were glazed over, almost like she was sedated. I smiled and told her to enjoy. She slowly reached out and grabbed the bag. I was waiting for her to say something, but she just kept staring at me blankly, with no emotion. I was immediately weirded out and felt like something could pop out of the darkness or walk up behind me at any second. So I speed walked back to my car. I heard the door shut right as I got back to my car door. I hopped in, locked the doors, and immediately surveyed my surroundings. As I started driving off, I looked over through my passenger side window, and I saw her looking out of her living room window at me. I got out of there as quickly as I could and wrapped up my night shortly after that. There was something so creepy and unsettling about that whole exchange. From the random letters in the order, to the area, to this woman's appearance. She stood there like an emotionless zombie, staring and not saying a word. If you're thinking about driving for any of these food apps, do it, because it could be great side income, but be careful. Sometimes you can find yourself in some pretty weird situations. This happened last summer. My boyfriend and I had recently started dating, and were both desperate for a break. He was under intense work stress, and I had just lost my dad and was drowning in legal paperwork. Itching for an outlet, I said, "Screw it. Why don't we go for a week to my summer house and just chill? We would still have our responsibilities, but at least we'd be together." He loved the idea. We set a date and we're off. This house is in a tiny remote village, agricultural and empty in summer. Olive and orange trees stretch for miles. It's about 20 minutes from the sea. Perfect for two overstimulated 20-year-olds to just exist in limbo for a couple of days. The house sits across from the village square, an old school building in the middle, a playground to the left, and an open space where they host a yearly festival. Growing up, my parents would watch us play from the balcony. Behind the square, down a slight incline, there's a small olive orchard and an electrical building that powers the lights of the square. This layout becomes important later. On our second night, close to midnight, we decided to go sit on the swings, something I had always wanted to do since I was a kid. The square was empty, naturally, peaceful even. After a while, we got bored and moved to a small play structure with a slide further back in the playground, closer to the school. The light there had gone out, leaving that area dim but still visible. I was facing the direction of the olive orchard and the electrical building. My boyfriend was facing my house. I glanced over my shoulder and noticed my aunt's porch light. Her house is next to ours. Turn off. When it's on, it usually means someone's sitting in the yard, probably in our direction, as their house also faces the playground. I remember thinking we finally had some privacy. About 10 seconds later, every hair on my body stood on end. There was this debilitating pit in my stomach and a voice screaming in my head, "You need to leave, now." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My boyfriend looked at me, and I knew he felt it too. We kept talking, almost deliberately, as if acknowledging it would make it real. But the feeling didn't fade. It intensified. It felt more urgent. Like if we didn't leave soon, something terrible was going to happen. Whatever this feeling was, it wasn't coming from the direction of my house. It was behind the school, near the electrical building. Maybe, in the trees, almost as if we were being hunted. What made it worse was the silence. No insects, no rustling, nothing. When we had first arrived, there was a breeze and light rustling in the grass. Now, nothing but deafening silence. We got off the structure slowly. We refused to use the ladder that led towards the orchard, and instead went down the slide facing the exit. We didn't run. I didn't stop looking over my shoulder until we reached the street. The entire time, I feared that my eyes would meet someone else's in the darkness. Only once we were inside did we talk about it. We described the same gut-punching feeling. The same location, the same urgency. Neither of us had seen or heard anything, yet somehow that made it worse. I also found it extremely weird how quickly after I saw my aunt's light turn off, I felt in danger, as if someone knew that there was no one who could save us watching anymore. That could be the paranoia talking, but it all didn't, and still doesn't, sit right with me. The next day, shaken but trying to be rational, we went on with our plans. Cooped up from staying home all morning, we decided that evening to have dinner in a nearby mountain town. We were gone no longer than 3 hours. When we got back, my boyfriend parked on the incline of the driveway. I walked ahead to open the garage gate. I didn't see it until I was almost standing over it. There, at the end of the incline to my driveway, lay a motionless cat on the drain, placed directly in front of the entrance. No blood, no signs of impact, just wrong. I froze. My boyfriend immediately moved in front of me, got me inside, and locked everything. He grew up in the countryside and later told me it didn't look like roadkill, and that the cat appeared to have died hours earlier, maybe even somewhere else entirely. I've been told cats usually hide when they're nearing death. If it was roadkill, the absence of blood or impact made little sense. This felt almost deliberate. I've never encountered a dead animal before, so I'm not sure. The cat remained there until the next night. When we came home from dinner, it was gone. Nothing else happened after that. We stayed the rest of the week and have been back since, but I've never felt that fear there again. Although I always look at the playground expecting to see something, there's nothing ever there. I still think about how sudden it was, how primal, how both of our bodies reacted before our minds had time to catch up. I'm coming here for some closure, I guess, as it's been a year and we still talk about it from time to time, and that feeling comes back all over again. I don't know if someone was watching us or if someone wanted us to know they had been. Either way, to whoever or whatever was near that playground that night, let's not meet again. The events date back nearly 10 years, when my story begins. I lived in a small village, and on my street, everyone knew each other. The neighbor, 2 houses down from mine, moved out, and an elderly couple moved in afterward. They were really kind, welcoming, and generous. They were called Joseph and Raphael. Joseph was a super chill retired police officer who loved fishing, and Raphael was a generous former town hall employee. My parents and theirs started becoming friends, inviting each other over. Raphael seemed perfect, even giving my little brother sewing lessons and sharing fruit from her garden. But my parents sometimes found that she said overly personal things, or things that didn't always make sense. They didn't pay much attention to it at first. One day, my family learned that Joseph had been arrested for domestic violence against Raphael. The whole neighborhood was shocked. Raphael came to my parents' house saying she was very afraid her husband might return after being released from custody. She insisted on staying with us, but my father reassured her that he would regularly check on the house to keep an eye on things. One day, Joseph came back to Raphael's place to get his belongings and screamed, "Where is my rifle?" We learned she had given it to my older brother, who was only 15 at the time, and passionate about weapons because she thought it might interest him. Already a strange thing for a responsible adult to do with a minor. But what really changed everything happened one morning. Raphael asked if she could borrow a trailer, but my mom refused because my father was at work. The neighbor became very insistent and absolutely wanted that trailer, but my mother held firm. From that moment on, over the following weeks, Raphael completely changed. She was no longer the sweet, attentive, elderly neighbor. She started putting roses in our mailbox so we pricked our hands, throwing her trash into the field next to our house. She even wrote messages on a chalkboard hung on the front of our house, insulting my mother's family and spreading lies about us. She regularly went to the police station to accuse my family, pretending to be a poor elderly woman being mistreated. One of her complaints was literally jihadist threats from my older brother, simply because he often wore a hood and covered his mouth with a neck warmer. We learned she even looked into my paternal grandfather. She sent us insulting letters and racist audio recordings targeting my father, in which she was completely hysterical. She eventually began following my little brother and a neighbor, Bree, who went to school with him. Raphael often sat on the bench in front of her house, watching the street and trying to turn the village against us. And more. It was the beginning of a real nightmare. So much so that my parents started doubting whether Raphael had been truthful about Joseph's alleged domestic violence. My parents heard that another family in the neighborhood before us, Bree's family, had gone through similar things, but they chose to ignore it. Raphael didn't stop with my family, though, because my mother reacted to her provocations, which is understandable given how awful they were, and that only filled her persecutory delusions. What Raphael wanted most was for my mother to snap and hit her so she could play the poor elderly victim. One day, Raphael even scratched my mother's hands to try to provoke her into slapping her. But my mother kept her cool. Unfortunately, the scratches didn't even leave marks, so there was no proof. My parents felt powerless because the police officers were against them. Bree's family refused to file a complaint for fear of being targeted again, which is understandable. And my parents had no way of having the neighbor committed, even though she was clearly acting with ill intent. My older brother, being a reckless teenager, amused himself by provoking her because he thought it was funny to play with her hysteria, not realizing she could be dangerous, which pushed her even further. She even behaved childishly, sticking out her tongue when we looked her way while passing by. One late autumn morning, it had rained a lot recently, so the nearby fields were muddy, a detail that will matter. I had to go pick up my little brother and Bree from primary school because Raphael often roamed around. I was walking along the side of the road on my street when I saw a white car speeding toward me from the far end. The problem was that my neighbor's mother, Valerie, who was Bree's mother, had a car that looked a lot like Raphael's. So I thought, oh, that must be Valerie. Strangely, Valerie didn't seem to be slowing down and kept coming fast. Suddenly, I realized it wasn't Valerie, but Raphael at the wheel. She was laughing hysterically, blasting loud music, staring right at me while driving straight toward me. I started to understand she had no intention of braking. When she was about 5 meters away, I managed to jump off the roadside and into the field next to it, which was very muddy from the rain. She swerved, driving a bit, onto the field, leaving a muddy tire mark on the path, and parked in front of our house. I started shouting at her, but she kept dancing in her car with the music blaring, making that hand gesture that means you want to speed away. At the time, I didn't think it was that serious. I was only 11 and didn't really grasp how dangerous it was. That evening, I told my parents, who decided to take me to the police station, even if the officers would look at us badly because of all the lies Rafael had spread about us for weeks. I was questioned alone, without my parents, by 3 police officers, but I felt they didn't believe me. They kept asking whether I was sure and whether my parents had told me to lie. When I left the interrogation room, and while the case was probably about to be dismissed, meaning Rafael would come after us again, one of the officers noticed my shoes, which were covered in mud. He began to think I might be telling the truth. He told me we were going to my street, so I could show him where the car had gone. He saw the muddy tire tracks from Rafael's car still there. Rafael was arrested and questioned. I later learned she had done it because she wanted to scare me for fun. She was eventually committed to a psychiatric hospital, thanks in part to her sons. They told the authorities that Rafael had been schizophrenic, paranoid, and suffering from persecutory delusions for a long time, and that they had endured her behavior throughout their childhood. On top of that, everywhere she went, she would pick targets and harass them. And that's how this little horror story that happened to me ends. What would have happened if I hadn't stepped off the road? Would she have braked? And if the car incident hadn't backfired and led to her being committed, how far would she have gone? We'll never know, and thankfully so. My friend and I, both 20 at the time, were students at a university in Midwest Wales. Nothing much ever happened there, aside from typical uni students' activities like going out drinking, taking drugs, and smoking weed. And man, we smoked a lot. One evening, we were invited out to one of his events, some sort of ceremony for one of his social clubs, at the local cocktail bar. The drinks were flowing, and we were having a nice time. After a couple of hours, we noticed someone we knew. It was one of our old weed dealers we hadn't seen in around a year or so. He noticed us too and decided to come and join us for a drink. For this tale, we'll just call him Harry. As we were all catching up, we asked how Harry was doing. "Oh, I'm okay, yeah, but one of my friends got stabbed earlier," he said. We were shocked, but Harry was originally from London, so we weren't as surprised as we could have been. An hour or so later, we decided it was enough of the drinks and it was time for us to unwind with the joint. "Oh, you guys can smoke back at my place if you like," Harry offered. So my friend, who we'll call Bill, and I decided to go. Harry also picked up 2 other people from the bar, a couple, but I didn't know either of them. As we walked to Harry's place, we stopped off by the corner of the local spar store, where we noticed a wet puddle on the floor. "So the friend I told you about? That's his," Harry said, and we realized this was a puddle of blood. A fucking puddle of it. Realizing the sort of company I was with now, a drug dealer from London, I wasn't feeling super great about going to his house. Everything felt off about this, but I didn't want to seem intimidated by it. He was my friend. At least we acted like friends, but in all honesty, I didn't really know this guy. Maybe I just wanted to look cool in front of him. I'm not sure, but all I know is that as much as I didn't want to go there now, it already felt too late to do anything about it. We continued down the street to his house, which was the same direction the blood had come from. It trailed all down the street. I was almost half expecting to find a body at the end of this trail. There was that much of it. We got outside his house, and he stopped and turned to us. We looked down, and lo and behold, another puddle of blood. He opened the front door and let us in, locking the door behind us. So, the friend that got stabbed? He got stabbed on my doorstep here, Harry explained. Even though I've seen the evidence and had a million thoughts running through my head, I just couldn't seem to believe it. Apparently, he'd gotten into a dispute with another one of Harry's friends while inside the house. Something about someone's girlfriend, and he'd stabbed him right there, and then on the doorstep in the street. This was a Saturday night as well, so it wasn't like it was a quiet day. All of us were feeling pretty nervy now, and although he said it was his friend, how were any of us to know what really happened? We all sat down on the couches, surrounded by hundreds of takeaway boxes that were filled with rocks. On closer inspection, the boxes were filled with MDMA, and each box had a lot of it in. Now, I'd been around drugs before. However, this much was enough to scare me, even without the bloodbath on the doorstep. The guy from the couple tried to take a photo of the stash before Harry ran over and punched his phone out of his hand, threatening him not to do that. I decided to smoke a joint now more than ever, although I thought it would probably make me paranoid. Despite my worry about paranoia, we rolled a joint and were asked if we could sit on the bathroom floor to smoke it. This night was just getting weirder and weirder. We smoked our joint without anything to worry about and sat back on the couch. As we did, a boy walked through the door. He was probably around 18, but had one of those faces that looked around 13. He was in a full tracksuit, and his eyes were as wide as I'd ever seen eyes open. He was high. I couldn't tell you on what, but he was high. He took it upon himself to enter the room and walk between us all, freestyle rapping and sporadically doing keys around us. Harry was loving it, cheering him on, while the rest of us just sat silently, watching him, waiting for something to go awry. Could this have been the stabber from before? We hadn't even seen anyone else in the house, and someone of this guy's caliber almost looked like it would be something he was around all the time, especially if he was from London as well. However, the boy soon left, and Harry asked if we would like to smoke another one. We better get going. I'm tired, and that last joint had put me on my ass, I said, looking for a reason to get out. Surprisingly, Harry was very reasonable with this and unlocked the door for us. Bill and I headed out the door, and we stomped home as quickly as we could, following the trail of blood back up the street. So, drug dealer friend who made us follow the trail of blood to your home, let's never meet again. In December of last year, I, female 21 at the time, met Nick, a guy 22, on Hinge. Mistake, I know. I thought he was very handsome, and he went to a good school for a D1 sport. Before we first met, he seemed incredibly respectful and asked many questions trying to get to know me. The first time we hooked up was an odd experience. He asked me how I did on the SAT, wouldn't stop complimenting me about my rosy red cheeks, put a used Zen in my mouth as we were making out, and stole my lighter as an excuse to return and see me again. He also told me that he had lost tens of thousands of dollars gambling in the past. Obviously, my judgment was questionable, but I continued hooking up with him as I found him endearing, and he still seemed like a very sweet boy. He went to school in another city, so I saw him a few times over the next couple of months when he would come back to our hometown. The red flags started to show, and in retrospect, I really should have dipped at that point. The third time we hung out, he asked to take me on a date, but he was 2.5 hours late and brought me to Blaze Pizza, where I watched him house an entire pizza as I twiddled my thumbs. After the date, he confessed to me that he was an alcoholic. I later found out he was a drug addict too, and had become sober after a couple of stints in rehab during his freshman year of college. He told me a story about how he got one of his scars. He was harassing a woman in a gas station parking lot in high school, and her boyfriend hit him, so he beat him up and escaped on his bicycle. But a random passerby pushed him off. He also had a minor fit when he realized I was wearing a coat made for men and had cut my hair shorter than when I had met him. Eventually, we became exclusive and started dating. I know, yes, I know. When I said yes to dating, he was so happy that he cried tears of joy. That night, he confessed to me that he came from a billionaire family. We dated for 6 months after that, and I was exposed to depths of addiction and idiocy, especially around money, that were unimaginable to me. For example, he would book express Amtrak tickets when arriving at the station instead of ahead of time, spending hundreds of dollars each time. He would rack up $1,000 Uber bills on his family's account. His parents paid him $50 an hour to walk the dog, and he worked for a charity his mom had set up, paying him $30 an hour. But he was still somehow always broke. His mom would go back to school shopping for him and spend tens of thousands on his clothing, which he never had occasion to wear because he was functionally unemployed. He was a terrible boyfriend, overly demanding, very shady with other women, and incapable of taking no for an answer. He'd tell me many stories from his addict days, including when he had tried meth that a drug dealer had given him as a free sample, when he'd lost over $20,000 getting scammed at a casino by a con man, or when he got robbed by a hooker and her pimp. I thought he was a changed man, but about 3 months into our relationship, he started gambling again. I'd never seen a real addict in action, and it was mind-boggling. He would spend any time he could at the casino. He would be there all night, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., or leave his internship early to go during the afternoon. He rapidly started losing lots of money, but no one in his family realized, even though he lived with them. He would imply that he knew how much money was in my bank account and the PIN on my card, and I knew that he owed people a lot of money, so I changed all of my codes. About 2 months later, his father's alcoholism became a major problem, and the father was sent to rehab. My boyfriend then started drinking again. Within 2 weeks, he broke up with me and slept with another woman. I found that out months later when he scrolled through a selfie he'd taken with her in his room the day he broke up with me, and then tried to play it off. By the end of the relapse, he had drunk 24/7 and would call me, threatening me and flexing his superior education on me. No one in his family had realized he was drinking again, and I ended up telling his sister what had happened. Within 24 hours, they had sent him back to rehab, the same rehab that his father was in. $1,200 a night, might I add. Then the rehab center said that only the father or son could stay, not both, and the father kicked the son out to a much lower quality place. Eventually, my boyfriend got out of rehab and entered a halfway house, but I told him that I no longer wanted to be with him. So he left the halfway house and immediately came to my house. A few weeks later, I found out about the other woman and also started to question a formal he'd gone to 2 days before we started dating. When I ended things for good, I tried many times earlier, but he would always cry and beg, and it was effective. He lost his mind. He threatened to email my nudes to my father and my job, threatened to file a police report if I didn't pay him $1,000 in cash to compensate him for any dates we'd ever gone on. We usually went 50-50, and threatened to have me institutionalized through the Marchman Act, which I later looked up and found out was only for Florida, where we do not live. He was obsessed with the idea of me going to his friend's engagement party with him. And when I blocked him everywhere, including email, he messaged me through Spotify, threatening me if I didn't go with him. He also heavily implied that he'd put a hidden camera in my room and had given me an STD. It was a crazy ride. I should have gotten out of much, much earlier, but it does make for a good story. And there are 1,000 more entertaining aspects to it I didn't have room for. Like his suing his school because he failed 2 classes from not turning assignments in. His obsession with the size of his younger brother's penis. And his crazy ex-girlfriend who was harassing me throughout the entire relationship. I understand her now. November 5th, 2022. I guess I'll never forget that date or disassociate it from this event. I had just finished my courses for the year, and summer was right around the corner. That meant it was time to catch up with some of my friends. On this particular occasion, it was Nathan. His real name has been changed for the sake of anonymity. Nathan was my best friend at the time, and we would sometimes spend months without seeing each other. But when we did hang out, we would always do the same thing. Grab some snacks and catch up over coffee before sunset, then walk around town until it was around 9 p.m. and call it a day. The usual. This time, though, nothing felt usual. From the moment I saw him, something in my stomach just dropped. It wasn't him, per se. We were on good terms, but something about hanging out that day it just felt off. Right as I greeted him with a handshake and we headed to our usual spot for coffee, I felt it. We got there, and things went by the book. I shook it off as me being nervous because I hadn't seen him in such a long time. That was, of course, until Nathan mentioned that he felt like things around us were weird. Another drop in my stomach. I kept my cool, trying not to sound paranoid or anything, but I guess I couldn't help it. "You feel it too, huh?" I asked. He nodded. He said he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it was like our surroundings were odd, like hostile, even when there was nothing to fear. Was this some sort of shared paranoia? Was the end of the year getting to us? We didn't know, but we were sure that it was the first time we'd felt something like that. We finished our coffee, and I felt like maybe having a walk wasn't going to be the best idea. Maybe we should call it a day now and head back to our homes while there was still light. At that moment, my dad called and asked if I could find out the price of a phone he was thinking about buying. So, while we were on our way to the store, in my mind, I kept thinking, yeah, I'll ask about this, and then we'll split. But no, for some reason, and even after what we'd felt, we still decided to do our long walk until dark. That was my last chance to turn back before it all went down. We used to walk around this boulevard that wasn't really a dangerous area. During a normal weekend, it would be filled with teenagers and young adults sitting on the grass divider in the middle, drinking or smoking, listening to music too. It was a Saturday, 8:30 p.m., completely empty. I like to think that was my last warning. As we passed the corner, I noticed two other guys who were coming from it as we crossed the street and kept walking straight. I looked over my shoulder and noticed that they were behind us. They were probably around our age, maybe older. Now, something like that doesn't normally trigger my red flags, but these two did it, with so little. What set me off first was that they weren't talking like us. They were dead silent. Secondly, their pace was off. They weren't trying to pace us, but they didn't stay away behind either. They were keeping distance. We were completely alone on that street, the four of us. As we approached the end of the boulevard, which goes down into a big park, I warned Nathan, "Hey, these two behind us, they might be onto something." Nathan looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "Want to cross the street, just to be sure?" I nodded, and we did so. We crossed the grass area in the middle and onto the other side, then kept walking forward down the street. And that was when I saw it. When my heart, gut, and every organ in my body knew before my brain could process it. The guys on the other side upped their pace. One of them grabbed something from a fanny pack he had on his chest and went ahead of his friend, partner, whatever. Before I could react, this guy crossed the street, got in front of us, and said, "Boys, keep it quiet, or we'll shoot you both dead," as his partner got close to us as well. My vision went blurry. I couldn't see their faces anymore. All I could see was that they were in front of us, threatening to end our lives and seemingly armed. I froze. My entire life literally flashed before me. My parents, my girlfriend, the dog we just rescued that I was happy to see every time I got home. What was the last thing I'd say to any of them crossed my mind, knowing that I would probably never see them again. In a panic, I gave one of them my phone and raised my hands, but Nathan managed to snap out of it and ran away. I stayed frozen there, with those shitheads threatening us and telling them to come back. It wasn't until he yelled, "Run!" that I snapped too, and I ran toward him. I tripped not far from where I'd started. "Shoot him! Shoot him!" I heard behind me. I thought, this is it. This is how I go. I gathered my strength and got up. I kept running, expecting to hear a gunshot behind me, but it never rang. We ran all the way back. I was finally able to walk again, but all I could muster was, "Help us, please! Help!" at the top of my lungs. We ran a few blocks until we stopped from exhaustion. Nathan had lost his glasses back at the boulevard and wanted to go back because he couldn't see without them. And getting a new pair is very expensive here. I refused. I told him we could stay there and wait for help or the police, but eventually he convinced me, and we went back, carefully, to the place where our lives changed forever. Luckily, he found them, and those two assholes were long gone. I'm not claiming that anything supernatural happened here, but I feel like everything that had happened before that horrific moment was some sort of warning sign trying to stop us from going there. Hell, when the dust settled, people started showing up in the boulevard. The same kind of people I described earlier. We came across the woman who was waiting for her husband to get out of work. Upon hearing what happened, she offered us a ride to my house, and we accepted. When we got there, I hugged my mom like I'd never done so in my life, and I was thankful to be able to do it. Needless to say, that day changed me forever. I know it could have happened on any date, at any hour, and anywhere, but November 5th will never be a normal day for me again. Nathan and I drifted apart, not because of this, but our friendship was never really the same afterward, especially with me refusing to go around those areas at night, particularly if we were walking. I will never, ever ignore that feeling again. Not that I want to ever re experience it. And if your gut tells you that something is off, trust me, it's off. Thank you for listening to my story. And I guess the moral here is always trust your gut because you never know. It might just save your life. Before I tell my story, I just want to say I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing it for a long, long time after what happened a few months ago. Anyway, I just really needed to get this off my chest because I don't know who else to tell. About half a year ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For context, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful about walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So, for about a year, whenever school gets hard or life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and just walk around for about 2 hours or so. Anyway, the night I'm talking about began with me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got on my shoes once I was outside, and hopped the fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walk down the middle of it and head toward a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time, just walking in the loop, and eventually ended up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon on the ground and decided to grind it against the pavement until the spoon part was half gone, out of boredom. This is important later. I was chilling there for a bit before I decided to walk around a little bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park about 10 minutes away from my neighborhood, where I usually end off the night by staring off into the sky. The park itself creeps me out sometimes because at night, there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides of you, and anyone could watch from the woods. Anyway, shit starts to get real here because I'm staring up into existence, feeling like a philosopher while I'm lying on one of those table benches, when I hear an old man whistle. I probably shut up because I have never had another human interaction on these walks. And I see this old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight by the only entrance of the park. I had seen him before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day. And I would honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing the same fancy button up and cargo pants every day. My mom and I have talked about him, and we think he's mentally disabled and probably lives with a caretaker. I had an interaction with him once, about a year ago. I was walking home in broad daylight when I passed the man, who was at the time sitting on a bench. Dude just looks at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with a weird little smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, I know, even though I'm an atheist and I didn't really think much of it. Anyway, back to the park at night. I just stare at him in that empty parking lot, probably way longer than I should have because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were staring at each other for a really long time before he slowly starts walking toward me. At this point, I'm frozen in fear because why the fuck is this old white geezer out with me at like 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up at this point when he gets close to me and just gives me this cheeky grin like he knows something I don't yet. And I'm still just gawking at him like a fucking baboon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or movie when the main character is frozen in fear? Well, I have. And I never will again because at this point, I'm more frozen than I've ever been in my life. At some point, after probably like 10 seconds of awkward standing, he just kind of half pats and half grabs my shoulder and reaches into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. The same spoon that I was holding an hour ago at the shop plaza. He just kind of tucks it in my front sweatshirt pocket. And I guess something just makes my mind snap out of my frozen stance because I absolutely fucking book it to the public bathroom and lock the door. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night, and I'm guessing at this time it was past 3 in the morning. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly, I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon, and it was altered. Have you ever seen that one viral AI generated image where it looks completely normal at a glance, but you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search up name one thing in this image. Now, imagine that, except a word carved into a plastic spoon, but you can't read it or even identify any of the letters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour, just contemplating every single decision I've made in the past year that led up to this nightmare I was in at that moment. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone, and they can see my location whenever. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself toward the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back for a second and saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. This senile old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one more time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got to my neighborhood, where I caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back into my house. I haven't gone out at night since that experience, and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. I still have the same spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me, and if it was an isolated incident or if he had been stalking me on other late night trips. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the matter, unless you're here to lecture me about my actions, because trust me, I've already learned. Anyway, creepy guy that was stalking me that night, let's not ever meet again. This is the first time I've written this story down and not just relayed it to a friend. Although there are mentions of photographs taken in this story, the phone and MacBook I had them on, as they have been replaced. But I swear, this story is 1,000,000% true. I used to live in a pretty nice area of a major city, really cute streets, lots of old buildings, and it was safer to walk at night than some other neighborhoods. My only problem was I didn't exactly have the money to afford one of the nicer places nearby. I shared a single building with 5 other apartments, and I was on the ground floor. My upstairs neighbor had a dog that would bark at everything. I was told she was triggered by the sounds of children screaming, and we lived between a park and a kindergarten. I will never forgive myself for not confronting that asshole neighbor about his inability to properly care for that creature. Anyway, like I said, the building was old, so it needed maintenance all the time. The owners were a family from Chinatown, and when sending the grandfather as a handyman to try to fix everything with caulk didn't really work, eventually professionals did get called, though never when it was inconvenient for tenants, only when the building was at risk of being structurally damaged. At the time, I was working a night job as a custodian for a government facility. It was fine, the pay was great, and the workload wasn't too much, but it was the disrespect I couldn't stand. Eventually, I did quit, but when all this happened, I was still there and thus sleeping in late, usually not up until close to 11. This would become especially inconvenient for me when the landlady would give out my phone number for someone who needed to be let in the building, since I was on the ground floor directly next to the door. Illegal, by the way. Tenants do not work for the building owners. It's actually the opposite, but I digress. I had been told by my landlady the night before that someone might be getting in contact with me to get into the building, but I never got a text from anyone, and I figured they must have gotten in on their own. I was awoken by the sound of men trying to heave equipment down the narrow alleyway beside our house, which acted as a small area for trash, but also gave access to the back ground floor property that had a patio. I sat up, awake in my shitty loft bed my dad and I had made, and went scrambling down the ladder to go to the alleyway. I am a plant person, and many of my beautiful and uncommon outdoor plants had been in the alleyway and stacked inside or on top of the air conditioning cage on the window that led to my bedroom. I had to go make sure these grunting, groaning working men carrying huge rolls of tar paper down the tiny congested space would not knock anything over. I decided I would just bring it all inside between them putting down a roll and returning to their truck for another. I had grabbed 3 of my ferns and a bromeliad when a few of them came back up the alleyway. I was sort of shocked, like a deer in headlights, as I was trying not to drop my green babies dressed in my skimpy pajamas. I was in great shape at the time and got approached by men with sexual intentions almost every day. It was one of the reasons I loved being a night custodian. I got to wear shapeless coveralls and be left alone with a mop and my music. Being caught here like this was humiliating and scary. The men now squeezing down the alleyway were clearly roofers based on their equipment and the clothes they wore, and a few of them were staring. I apologized very quickly and told them I wanted to get my stuff out of the way. 1 or 2 of them gave me a "no worries" or "that's okay," and one said something like, "we would never let anything happen." I nodded, sort of shyly, embarrassed by the scramble of it all. I began handing some plants through the bars of the AC cage and onto the small ledge inside my bedroom window. I guess I didn't think about it at the time, but I had basically identified to these guys that not only did I live in this building, but on this floor and in this room, having clearly entered from a side door that connected to the narrow alley. They spent their day on the roof, were done by nightfall, and nothing weird happened. 2 days later, I was woken early in the morning by a phone call from a number with my city's area code. It was an unusual hour, so I answered just in case it was someone who needed to get into the building, as it hadn't come up as spam or anything like that. On the other end, I heard what sounded like the voice of a drunk man asking for Frank or Fan. He was slurring his words and had an accent, and I asked him over and over again to say it again until I finally told him he had the wrong number. Later, I woke up again when I heard commotion in the alleyway from my loft bed, but I was sleeping in and didn't worry about it, having no belief that the wrong number call I just received and a bit of noise in the alley, which we also share with another building, had anything to do with one another. I fell back asleep. I heard a bang and a crash from the interior hallway that briefly woke me up a third time. But then I fell asleep again. When I got up at around 10:30, I went to see if the shared washing machine was open in our basement. I noticed the hallway was a bit darker and that one of the hall sconces had been disassembled with no light bulb, plus some broken glass on the floor. I was a bit groggy still and didn't really process it too deeply. But what snapped me out of it was when the light bulb in the basement didn't turn on. The basement of this building was so freaky. Really long and deep with a low ceiling, full of crap from this and other rental properties owned by their landlord. Plenty of spider webs and their venomous occupants, black-footed sack spiders. And you had to turn your back on the long, dark, partially obstructed basement to use the washer/dryer. It was just a very unsettling experience, and I would not go down there without the light on. When I turned away from the pitch black, I noticed the owner's vacuum, which was usually near the side door entrance, wasn't in its place. I went back to my room to organize my laundry, figuring I would wait until I had the courage and split it into whites and colors, and darks and sheets and towels in the meantime. When I glanced over to my open window, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, sitting at an angle on the windowsill. A book with a revolver-style pistol on the cover, and a paper card sticking out of it. I don't remember what the note itself was. Something about wanting to give the book to me. But it was signed, Phone, which freaked me out. Was this left here by the man who called me on the phone? I immediately texted my third-floor neighbor, who I'll call Vanessa. She and I bonded over our terror over the long, scary basement, and I sent her a photo of the book and the strange note. She replied, "Hold on," and a few seconds later, I heard her knocking on my door. When I let her in, she looked completely freaked out, and I tried to ease the tension by laminating the broken hallway sconce. Vanessa told me she'd gone to use the laundry this morning before anybody else, and the light hadn't worked, same as me. She'd begun descending the stairs when she thought she could hear something, or maybe sensed it, and called out into the dark. She'd said, "Hello?" to see if anyone was down there, expecting the voice of one of our 3 other female neighbors and one feminine gay man. A man with a deep voice and accent said back to her that he was just fixing the light, but she said she could barely understand him because he was slurring his words. She turned around and immediately sprinted back up the stairs to return to her apartment. She said she yelled down again around an hour later, and no one replied, but wanted me to come down with her to make sure nobody was there anymore. I had 2 headlamps from work and a flashlight, and we went down the stairs together, practically crawling out of our skin. holding on to each other for dear life as we shouted into the dark. We saw that someone had broken the light bulb in the slot and brought down the vacuum to try to clean it, but had failed. They had also stolen a container of detergent from near the machines, as a trail of powdered soap went up the steps in multiple spots and into the hallway. Our only male neighbor didn't seem weirded out or concerned at all. In fact, he thought we were being dramatic and basically went about his day as if nothing had happened. We contacted our landlady, asking if someone was supposed to be coming by and that they had called me before coming in. She just blamed us for leaving the side door unlocked. I asked her if she could please verify the number that had called with the roofing people to see if maybe it was someone on their team, but she flat out refused, stating she and the company had worked together many times and had a good relationship, as if that had anything to do with the drunk guy that had walked into our house and seemingly taken or destroyed all the light bulbs. Again, I don't have photos of the note, the book, or the basement mess anymore, but if I'm able to get access to them, I will post them. This was over a year ago, and I no longer live there, but I still wonder if it was one of the construction workers on a bender who'd seen me that other day in the alley, who walked into the building after he'd been able to and just opened the first door he saw, aka the basement. Who knows why he disassembled the sconce or how the basement bulb had been broken. I wish I had the thinking to ask neighbors across the street for their ring cams, but I will truly never know who that person was. This may be a milder let's not meet story or experience, but I can assure you that it absolutely was an insanely terrifying experience for me at the time. And even to this day, I am 100% convinced that the man in this story is a potential predator or stalker, or at least possesses similar qualities and characteristics. So, back in 2014, I'd gone on a first date with a guy I'd matched on Tinder. I lived in DC at the time and worked on Capitol Hill for a U.S. congressman. I was 28 or 29 at the time. While nice, handsome, and a self-declared Southern gentleman, Tinder guy was extremely pushy leading up to our first date. My job was even more insanely busy than normal during that time, often requiring frequent all-nighters and entailing exactly zero social life to speak of. Looking back now, it's painfully obvious that I absolutely did not have the time or space in my life for dating back then. But after months of my bestie begging me to let her create a Tinder profile, I basically acquiesced and surrendered. For weeks, I'd tried to reschedule said first date due to work being crazy, but Tinder guy literally would not take no for an answer. He also was extremely manipulative and clearly gifted at it, as he basically guilt tripped me and broke me down until I finally agreed to a first date with him. Only dinner was mentioned for the date. So I went on the dinner. While the date went fine on paper and probably looked as such to any fellow patrons or bystanders, Tinder guy nonetheless kinda gave me the ick for some reason. At the time, I couldn't lock down why. He was nice and polite, had a great job, and was very attractive, but still, something about the way he would continue to gaze and stare at me so intently without blinking. It was also unsettling. It was like he was playing some intense, weird-ass staring contest where he was the only contestant. There were a lot of other icks and red flags during our date, but the first major one was the fact that I was casually held hostage, or at least it felt that way. At the conclusion of our dinner, and after politely thanking him for the meal, and knowing 100% that there would be no second or future dates with this guy, I tried to make my exit home, telling him that I had a busy and early workday ahead of me, which was not a lie. Instead, Tinder Guy, of course, pressured me into going to a bar next door with him for a nightcap. Looking back now, and thanks to therapy, I've learned a lot about manipulation and how it can be weaponized. Tinder Guy was a master at this, and I had no choice. After 2 drinks that I didn't want, I again mentioned that I needed to get home, with a little more force this time. Tinder Guy acted like he didn't hear me, got up, and headed to the bar before returning with beers for both of us. I was beginning to get annoyed and super pissed, so after a few minutes, I faked an incoming phone call from my boss, essentially channeling my inner Meryl Streep, and proceeded to, or at least attempt to, give the best acting performance of my life. And not to pat myself on the back or anything, but I should obviously get all the Oscars because, holy shit, it worked. The good news, Tinder Guy totally bought my Oscar-worthy acting, finally stopped ignoring my polite pleas to go home, and agreed to let me, his hostage, go. However, he insisted on sharing an Uber home, even though we lived in completely separate neighborhoods, nowhere near each other. Not to mention the very obvious fact that I absolutely did not want this creeper to potentially gain any sort of idea where I lived or come anywhere near where I lived. Quite frankly, I knew at that point that I did not want to spend one more minute, nor have anything to do with this creepy stranger, including being trapped in a confined space like a car with this person. So I tried to refuse, repeatedly, as I was feeling extremely and increasingly more uncomfortable. And, again, obviously not wanting him to see where I live. But he literally wouldn't take no for an answer. So, in a major, what the fuck are you doing moment, especially looking back now, 10 years later, I silently stomached my anxiety, concerns, and protests, and we proceeded to Uber to my neighborhood. Though I did get out at a different house or address a few blocks from my place, so he wouldn't have my exact address. As I attempted to disembark from the car as quickly as the flash, Tinder Guy followed behind me, grabbed my shoulder, spun me around, before then aggressively kissing me. Like I'm talking straight up manhandling my face with his tongue. Apologies for the NSFW description, especially if it results in bringing you any sort of trauma, but if I had to experience it, you do too. LOL. As Tinder Guy finally let go of my head and face, I was trying my best to swallow back vomit. And after 10 minutes of placating him, I finally got him to accept that this nightmare first date was finally over, that I was going to sleep, seemingly in the completely random stranger's house whom we were currently standing in front of, and he reluctantly agreed to leave. As soon as our Uber left with Tinder Guy and was out of sight, I ran to my actual home, locked and deadbolted the door as soon as I got inside, and literally sank to the floor in disbelief. In the end, once I'd calmed down and felt secure again, I was mostly just relieved to be home safe and sound and that I survived a date with a deeply unsettling, creepy, and disconcerting man. I had even joked to my roommates at the time, well, can't wait to never talk to that dude again. But alas, 10 years ago, me was a naive fool. Instead, immediately following our date, Tinder Guy proceeded to send me a barrage of texts that entire rest of the night, fawning all over me and mostly asking over and over again, can we FaceTime or video chat? Keep in mind, this was literally 1 hour after I'd gotten home from our date. I lied. This whole experience has taught me that I'm actually not a terrible liar, at least under duress. Instead, I was already in bed and basically asleep. And since I had absolutely zero intention of ever speaking to this person again, I naively thought that was the end of it. Tinder Guy continued to text me nonstop the next few days, and I'd either ignore him or send him short and curt responses. While it was a cop-out, I'd planned on messaging him the truth and letting him down gently at the end of the week, aka when I wasn't swimming in work craziness. As I mentioned earlier, and for context and background for what I described next, I worked on Capitol Hill for a U.S. congressman at the time, and as such, my office was subject to strict security screenings, metal detectors and security, x-ray scanners at the building entrance, which also extended to incoming mail, packages, and deliveries. So, after this first date debacle, I got a call on my office line from the off-site Capitol Hill package center, stating that they were currently processing and screening a package for me and that it should be delivered to my office in 2 days. I thought, that's odd. I'm not expecting anything. So who would mail me something? But I shrugged it off, as it wasn't the first time I'd received unsolicited packages due to the nature of my job, and I basically forgot all about it until that Friday. Our office receptionist came to my cubicle with an obnoxiously gaudy and over-the-top bouquet of roses and an accompanying card. Right away, I immediately knew who was responsible. However, the real reason I felt so deeply unsettled was the sheer fact that I'd never told Tinder Guy who I worked for, or, hell, even which state or delegation my boss belonged to. I'd given him literally zero clues as to whom the member I worked for. Purposefully, I might add. And while my social media settings were pretty tight and private anyway, I didn't include the name of the member office in which I worked in any of my online profiles, including LinkedIn. I also didn't give Tinder Guy my last name, so I have no idea how he could have found it to begin with. There were and are 535 total congressional offices on Capitol Hill, 435 House offices, and 100 Senate. That said, there are approximately 15,000 plus congressional staffers who work on the Hill, and there's no telling how many staffers, who share my first name, you'd have to go through in searching for my last name and office address. I shared exactly zero identifying details about the member office in which I worked, and to this day, I have no idea how Tinder Guy found out this identifying information when I only provided him with just my first name and general employer information. Needless to say, if I wasn't creeped out enough by this guy before or at that point, now I was 1000% full-fledged freaked out, especially reading the note that accompanied the flowers. Lowlight. He talked about how great of a kisser I was. Vomit. What he wanted to do to me. Bile is still rising. How he hoped I could meet his family. Add delusional to the list of descriptors for this guy. And how he couldn't wait to see me again. LOL, in your dreams, bud. I look forward to seeing you never. One good thing that came out of this experience is that it finally, and obviously, gave me the balls to end things with Tinder guy via text. Dating is the fucking worst. And until this experience, if I was talking to someone, but also knew at the same time that I wasn't interested, I would still engage and respond to messages and basically lead them on, all because I didn't want to hurt their feelings and felt guilty. I now realize how unfair that is, and was to the other person, and have since vowed I'll never cop out when it comes to uncomfortable issues, topics, and messages that the recipient needs and deserves to hear. It's also helped instill in me that whole fuck politeness mantra. I'm fortunately in a serious long term relationship now, but while dating or even in my regular life, if I ever feel uncomfortable and uneasy like Tinder guy made me feel, I now fight the urge to be agreeable and polite and either directly block or cut ties or at least explain why I'm blocking before cutting off communication. Anyway, apologies for the length. I've never shared this with anyone outside of my roommates at the time, so it was cathartic to type it all out. Stay safe out there. I've had a bit of a crazy life and could write a book on my experiences. As an adult, a majority of my strange and scary encounters have been in my professional life. I've been a nurse for almost 8 years. I transitioned from hospice nursing to long term care about 2 years ago. I fell in love with hospice work, and it remains one of my passions. It's been wonderful to now provide end of life care to my residents, whom I've known for years. Death is different for everybody. Some linger while others pass unexpectedly. This is the story of a death that left a lasting impression on me, and I'll never forget it. To protect identities, I'll refer to this patient as Maria. I was Maria's hospice nurse for a long time. She had dementia with a very, very slow decline. Unless patients with dementia develop an acute illness, it can take years for their bodies to decline and ultimately pass away. As many know now, dementia is the slow death of the brain. It starts with forgetfulness, then not knowing how to take care of yourself, then normal brain patterns being disrupted, with day-night patterns switching. End-stage dementia leaves a person nonverbal, with a blank stare, unresponsive to their environment, unable to feed themselves, and slowly losing body control, like the ability to maintain a sitting position with their back, then loss of neck control. The first signs of transitioning to active death are the loss of appetite, then a loss of thirst, and then the body shutting down over the course of days or weeks. Dementia is one of the hardest conditions for families and caregivers to witness. Each decline marks a piece of that individual that is permanently lost and is grieved by the family. Your devotion and love for them never changes, but you realize who they are as a person is slowly fading. It's difficult or impossible to cope with for most people. Maria was one of these dementia patients. She was a woman of vigor and life in her prime, very intelligent, independent, and humorous, and stubborn as nails, but as time went on, she became a shell, sometimes able to make focused eye contact and smile, other times sitting blankly while speaking incoherent sentences. I thought we had almost lost her a number of times. One day, during a visit, she began turning blue, her oxygen tanking, and signs that she had an internal bleed. But she recovered in the following days. It was a difficult case. You want to give the family the signal that it was time for a final visit, but the frequency of her crashing, then recuperating, made it difficult to judge when she was actually terminal. Soon after this, Maria stopped eating and drinking. We had her stay in bed, as it looked like she would pass away in a week. She began vomiting dark red blood, a symptom called terminal restlessness presented, with her thrashing in bed and needing strict management with end-of-life medication to stay comfortable. I called the family to have them say goodbye and begin a bedside vigil if they wished. I don't know how, but Maria lived 4 weeks in this condition. It is extremely rare, but like I said, every person is different, and some patients will persist until a special day or person arrives, like an anniversary, holiday, or family member from out of state finally gets to their bedside. During the 4 week mark, I finally got the call that she had passed. I was on site with another patient, so I went to her room within minutes of getting the call. She was still, no breathing, no pulses. She looked to be at peace. As a hospice nurse, we legally pronounce time of death. I was warned when I started my position that there are rare cases where someone can be clinically dead but suddenly self-resuscitate. My mentor recommended doing a 5-minute assessment before officially calling time of death, as she had instances of patients spontaneously breathing after a 2-minute assessment. So I sat at Maria's bedside, listening to where her heart was with my stethoscope. No beat, just silence. No rise and fall of the lungs. She had finally passed. I turned to the dresser by her bed and began filling out the paperwork, marking time of death, then began packing my supplies. By this point, Maria was likely dead for at least 10 minutes from the time the caregiver found her during rounds. Then, the most horrifying thing happened. You know haunted houses that have the mannequins in the bed that pop up and scream as a jump scare? Turns out that can actually happen. Maria suddenly took a large gulp of air, jerked upwards into a sitting position, and screamed loudly. I almost pissed my pants, whipping around to find her, eyes wide and bulging out of her head, with blood running down the side of her mouth. As I mentioned, she had a known internal bleed, and some of that blood had traveled into her throat, which resulted in it streaming from her mouth. It only lasted a few seconds. Then she lost consciousness and slammed back into bed. I almost fainted on the spot and felt bile in my throat. Never in my work as a hospice nurse did I think what I had just witnessed was possible. My heart was beating like a racehorse, and I was frozen, uncertain if what I just saw actually happened. I went back to her bedside. Lo and behold, she had a heartbeat again and was breathing on her own. I tried to see if she would wake up or respond to me, but nothing. I immediately called my supervisor and 2 of my hospice nurse friends, trying to make sense of what happened. They all comforted me, acknowledging that it was an extremely strange case. But they told me this wasn't the first time they had professionally heard of or experienced this type of event. And I had the caregiver who found Maria in bed come into the room. She was equally freaked out to find Maria breathing again. We washed Maria's face, got her comfortable, and continued with her end-of-life care, just like before. I was certain she would pass in the next hours. There was no way I could fathom a frail person having that type of event happen and persisting much longer. But Maria survived an additional 2 weeks. When I officially went to pronounce her, I waited 10 minutes before verifying her death, and I watched her the entire time I was filling out paperwork and waiting for the coroner, wanting to make sure her second death was truly a permanent transition. It was, and I was able to pray at her bedside. The funeral home came and brought her to the medical examiner's office before she ultimately had her celebration of life. Nothing of this nature has happened to me again. I was happy that Maria was finally at rest, as I knew the extensive amount of time she had lingered was very difficult for her family and took a toll on Maria's body. We were able to keep her comfortable, and her final passing was gentle. But her face, filled with terror, eyes bulging from their sockets, blood running down her face, and a scream that shattered my eardrums, had been imprinted into my mind. I never told the family. We didn't want them to suffer with the knowledge of what happened. It remained a story between me and the hospice nurses who I worked with at the time. Death is strange. It can be beautiful, or it can be a horrifying event. Rest in peace, Maria. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to a very creepy collection. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for remaining loyal and dedicated to this channel. I can't thank you enough, and as I always say, without you, I wouldn't have a voice, and this channel wouldn't exist. I'd be sitting here talking to myself. Anyway, thank you so much. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.